Good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to be standing up here and to be sharing with you from God's Word. In the last couple of years, a theme that I have been reminded of over and over again is the theme of faithfulness. This has been through verses such as Romans 12:12. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. This has come up a number of times to me and is one that I have sitting up on a board in my kitchen. It has come up through celebrating the life of my nana at the end of the last year and the way that she faithfully served God and other people. To being reminded of God's presence in my own life, particularly when I have faltered. Today we are going to explore what God's faithfulness may look like in our lives through the story of Moses and the Israelites, and consider how we can be imitators of God's faithfulness. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to pray. Dear God, thank you so much that we can meet here this morning and worship you together. I pray for your wisdom this morning, and Lord, I pray that you would teach us, challenge us, and encourage us through your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So in the book of Exodus, chapter 34, 6-7, God describes himself in this way to Moses. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. These verses are referenced and requoted over 20 more times in the Bible itself. As we consider how God summarizes his nature in this verse, and particularly his faithfulness, the context of when God shares this shows us what his faithfulness looks like in action. The book of Exodus tells the story of the Israelites, God's people, and their journey from slaves in Egypt towards the land that God had promised them. Through this book, we see how God's faithfulness is demonstrated through the keeping of his promises, through his ongoing provision, and through his continual presence. Let's explore these together, starting with the keeping of his promises. So at the beginning of Exodus, we read that the Israelites were in Egypt, having moved there during the time of Joseph. The Israelites continued to grow in number and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. A new king had come to power in Egypt, and he was worried about the power of the Israelites because of how large their numbers were, and was particularly worried if they would side against them if war was to break out. So he put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labour. The Egyptians worked them ruthlessly and made their lives bitter. Then along comes Moses, a man chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. In Exodus 3, 7-10, we read, "The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Israelites are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But this is not the first time we read of this promise from God. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, God made this promise to Abraham, knowing the difficulties that the Israelites would suffer. In Genesis 15, we read, "Then the Lord said to him, know for certain, 400 years from now, your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So God makes two promises. Firstly, that he will bring them out of Egypt, and secondly, that he will take them into the promised land. Through the next 10 chapters in Exodus, we read how God goes about rescuing the Israelites from the Egyptians. Initially, things get harder for the Israelites when Moses goes to Pharaoh to ask him to let the people go. And then there is a series of 10 plagues where God demonstrates his power to the Pharaoh and to the Egyptians. Finally, after the 10th plague, Pharaoh relents and lets the people go, including with gold, silver, and clothing from the Egyptians, just as God has promised that he would let them out with great possessions. A short time later, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds and went after the Israelites. But God delivers them miraculously through the parting of the Red Sea. God was faithful in rescuing the Israelites, just as he had promised. Now, the journey into the land God had promised took a little longer than they expected due to the disobedience of the Israelites. The Israelites continually grumbled against God and Moses for bringing them out of the land of Egypt, and the Israelites turned their back on the covenant that they had agreed to. They had agreed to follow in the words and the laws of God that would bring them freedom and to maintain their relationship with God. And while God forgave the Israelites for their sins and their disobedience, it wasn't until this generation that came out of Egypt had died out that the Israelites did in fact enter the promised land 40 years later. In Joshua 1, we read, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, and all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them.'" God did not give up on the Israelites. He did not forget the promises that he had made to Abraham and to Moses and the Israelites, nor did he choose to change the promises he made after they disobeyed. God made a way for the promises to be fulfilled, for them to enter the promised land just as he had said. Now, God's timing is not necessarily ours, and we may not always understand it. It may take much longer than we think, just like it did for the Israelites. But time and time again in the Bible, we can see that he is faithful in keeping and acting on his promises. The next aspect of God's faithfulness we will consider is God's ongoing provision. Now, the Israelites were living in the desert after coming out of Egypt, and deserts aren't really known for having lots of food or water. And just a few short days after God rescued them, the Israelites began to grumble. First, they grumbled that they didn't have anything to drink because the water was bitter. Next, they grumbled about not having food to eat and thinking that it would have been better off dying in Egypt where they had lots of food. And again, they grumbled about not having enough water to drink. In each instance, God faithfully provided for their needs, and this despite the fact that they had so quickly forgotten God's faithfulness to them. God provided them water to drink and manna and quail for food. At night, quail came and covered the ground, and in the morning, manna, a bread, appeared on the ground for them. Each family gathered as much as they needed for that day only, and on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much to prepare for the Sabbath. There was enough food for all the Israelites to eat. Now, the Israelites ended up being in the desert for 40 years, as I'd mentioned, before entering the Promised Land. And we read that the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. Day after day and year after year, God provided for the Israelites and their needs. So we've seen how God keeps his promises, and we've seen his ongoing provision. And now let's look at the third aspect of his faithfulness, his continual presence. We see this in the way God heard and responded to the cries of the Israelites when they were in Egypt. And we also see this in a tangible way as the Israelites travelled through the desert. In Exodus 13:21-22, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. God guided them in their travels through the desert, going ahead of them and showing them the way. When the Israelites had set up the tabernacle, a dwelling place for God where the Israelites would encounter and worship him, God's presence filled the tabernacle. In Exodus 40 we read, "Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all of their travels." The cloud and fire is a picture of God's faithfulness and a lesson to us that God never leaves nor forsakes his people. In all of their 40 years in the desert, God did not leave them. But what happens when we turn our backs on God, or when we keep sinning over and over again? Does God remain faithful even then? Let's look back to our verse from earlier about God's character and the context for when this occurred. Early on, during the Israelites' time in the desert, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments and the laws for how to live in right relationship with God and to follow what he said. Yet only a short time later, while Moses was on Mount Sinai, meeting with God for 40 days and nights, the Israelites became restless. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.'" Yet shortly after this, and them disobeying the first 2 commandments, this is the time when God declares to Moses his character, his faithfulness. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. And God promises to remain with the Israelites and to go with them into the land that he had promised. Praise God that his faithfulness does not rely on us. He is always faithful because it is in his very nature, and we can trust God to be consistent to his character. However, sometimes it can be hard for us to see and to recognise God's faithfulness, particularly in the midst of difficult times. Recently, I met a lady through the winter shelter program here at church. Unfortunately, through no fault of her own, she ended up in a situation where she was homeless and had been for the last few years. Yet what stood out to me most was that as we talked, and through her many tears, she shared of her hope and her trust in God, that he would provide a home for her to live in and to call her own. She commented that God comes through just at the right moment, and she shared stories of where she had seen God do this. She talked of Daniel in the Old Testament and how God rescued him and shut the mouths of lions in the lion's den so he wouldn't be eaten. And she even talked of God's faithfulness and provision in her own life that very day when she wasn't sure where she would sleep and whether or not she would have to give up her beloved dog that she had had for over 10 years. A spot had become available for her and her dog to come and stay at HumeRidge that night, which she commented came at just the right moment. In spite of her yet-to-be answered prayers about a home to live in, she was remembering, holding on to, and trusting in the character of God, of his love, mercy, and his faithfulness. Just like this lady, reflecting on God's faithfulness, whether through Bible stories, from seeing it in the lives of other people around us, or from recognising it from previous times in our lives, helps us to continue to trust in him and his character, and to respond in faithfulness back to him. And it is his Holy Spirit that empowers us to live in this way, as we read in Galatians 5:22-23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruit of his Spirit produces faithfulness in our lives and help us to walk in step with this. Before Isaac comes up to further explore our response to God's faithfulness and how we can be imitators of his faithfulness, I would like to invite you to take a moment to reflect on God's faithfulness through the words of this next song. Feel free to sit and reflect as long as you would like, or to stand and join with us as we sing in response to his faithfulness.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. And all my days I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in the darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down and surrendered now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Thank you, Dion, and thank you, Beth, for sharing with us this morning. Good morning, church. My name's Isaac, and it's also my privilege to be able to share with you this morning. Thank you for your patience with us as this morning has looked a little bit different. I pray that you just continue to stay with us. We've just finished this beautiful song, with lyrics that point us to the faithfulness of God. For your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. You've led me through the fire. In the darkest night, you're closest like no other. These words, and as Beth has been speaking earlier, assure us that our God is all-powerful, he's the creator, but that he's not distant and he doesn't treat us with disinterest. He's actually near, he's relational, and he's invested. As someone who's been a Christian since a young age, I find it that I actually struggle with this concept. For a long time, I've been somewhat jealous of new Christians as they encounter God for the first time, as they have a fresh, new relationship with Jesus. As they discover their faith and they develop in their love for God, I'm excited for them, yet something sinful in me lets me believe that because of my faith doesn't have that light bulb moment, that somehow God is more distant from me. I've been lucky enough in my life to have encountered very few situations that make me question the faithfulness of God. My story is not one of great struggle. It's not of overcoming great odds or of staggering life-changing moments. So when Ross asked if I would talk about this concept of remaining faithful to Christ, I felt rather unqualified. Certainly when I think about the stories in the Bible and the disciples that we hear about, of Moses, of Job, of Daniel, who are exposed to the most devastating of life's struggles, my own faithfulness seems somewhat uninspiring. I often think to myself, would I be a better Christian if I'd been through something of what they had? Did their triumph and their faithfulness through the valleys mean that God was closer to them than he is to me? Through all of this, I remind myself, however, that God has promised that he is always with me. In Matthew 28, the Great Commission, from verse 19, it says this: "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you." This is Jesus' battle cry, his inspirational speech, his final thought and instruction that he leaves with his disciples. but more than that, it is his heart for his people. The part that I wish to focus on is what he says next. And surely I am with you always to the end of the age. He is faithful. He's faithful, and he calls us to be imitators of him, as Beth has mentioned. He wants us to partner with him in spreading the gospel. And if God promises that he's always with us, it means that no matter the circumstances, no matter the weight that we may judge our actions of having, he sees it. So even though I may see being patient with someone at work as rather benign, God doesn't. If I choose to hold my tongue when the easy thing to do would be to participate in gossip, God values that. When we choose to place the needs of another above our own, be it our spouse, our friend, our child, parent, or complete stranger, God says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." In Hebrews 6:10, he promises us that God sees our work. It says, "God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him, as you have helped his people and continue to help them." In the past few weeks, our home group has been challenged in how we spend our quiet times with God. One of the challenges was simply to work on memorising passages of Scripture. And so with this theme of faithfulness in mind, I did what any educated, lifelong Christian from a family of pastors would do and Googled passages about faithfulness. And although that sounds like a poor source of information, what I found was a beautiful verse in 1 Corinthians 15. It reads, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labour is not in vain." What a reminder that is. And no, I didn't really manage to memorise that prior to today. It's a work in progress, but aren't we all? "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labour is not in vain." Suddenly, my wrestle with feeling unqualified, of questioning the closeness of God, of doubting that a somewhat vanilla journey through life could still remain a story of being faithful. This wrestle that I had has changed to reassurance. So whether it's travelling to Uganda on a mission trip, serving dinner at a winter shelter, driving a bus for youth group, or just working hard to show compassion and patience for those in our workplaces or homes, our labour is not in vain. When each of these things is done in response to God, the call that God has on your life, that's faithfulness. God says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So what does that mean for each of us today? When I reflect on how my actions should change in light of the gospel, I'm often convicted of how earthly my desires are and the immediacy I feel to fulfill them. Sometimes I'm easily swayed into gossip and putting other people down. I have trouble with people pleasing, and my plans are quite selfish sometimes. In those instances, I'm not being steadfast, immovable, or abounding in the love and the work of the Lord. So as I prepared this morning, God placed these things on my heart. These are areas in which I'm struggling to remain faithful to him in my walk. Maybe some of those things are true for you too. Let me encourage you to spend time with God, be it now, later, during the week, asking him to reveal the areas in which your faithfulness may be wavering. And be open with what he may be saying. There's a surefire way to remain unchanged, and that's asking with a hard heart or a hard head. If we do that, we remain on the same road, putting God in the passenger seat, saying, "I want to drive," and we put our lives on cruise control down a difficult road. Something that I've also been convicted of in my faith recently is that Christianity is too often recognised for the things that we're against and not the things that we're for, the things that we do. Ross has spoken about it a number of times recently. Perhaps what this means for me and for you is that an inactive faith, a faith that doesn't work on showing compassion, on helping those in need, on serving others, isn't faithful at all. Instead, we should be known for our willingness to act counterculturally, bringing help to the weary, to the sick, to the lost, and to the broken. And we should do these things because our faith leads us to do so, because Jesus leads us to do so. Our actions should communicate, Jesus, your influence on my life is so great that I want to pursue the things that you love. I want to hurt for the injustice that you do, and I want to further the gospel in whatever way that looks in my life. So where in your life is God calling you to step up and be faithful? We have to be honest with ourselves because God already knows these places. It's not a mystery to him. Being faithful involves identifying these struggles and moving toward God in those areas. It requires action over just simply being inactive or not doing the wrong things. Here's one very simple step that we can take forward in our faithfulness journeys. Have someone that you're accountable to. Accountability is a catalyst for faithfulness. As I've reflected over the times in my life where being faithful to God has been more challenging, I've discovered that I was never doing it alone. Now, of course, God has said in his word that he is always present. Deuteronomy 31 verse 6 says, "For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." But I believe that one way that God has exhibited this is through the strong Christian people that he has strategically placed in my life. He gave me my family, my wife. He gave me friends at school who shared the same faith. People in my house when I moved away from Toowoomba. People at university, in my workplaces, my football team. The list goes on. Without these friends, family, role models, teachers, guides, my walk with Jesus looks a lot more rugged, with a lot more stumbling. So in those areas of your life where your faithfulness is being tested or is dry, I encourage you to go to someone you trust. Find someone to pray with and who'll pray for you and who'll keep you accountable. Now, if we feel uncomfortable about the thought of being accountable with somebody, it's usually because there's an area in our lives that we're not proud of. Areas of our lives that don't follow in the faithfulness of God, that don't allow that fruit of the Spirit to grow. I believe this because that's how I've often felt about accountability. Accountability is a catalyst for faithfulness. We are called to follow in the faithfulness of God. For each of us, that looks a little different. Maybe you're visiting today, or just checking out what church and Jesus is all about. Maybe today might be the day you take a step forward in that relationship with Jesus. It might mean approaching someone, one of our elders or pastors, Beth or myself, the person that you came with, whoever it may be, and just simply asking them to pray for you or asking them how to get your hands on a Bible. I'm sure that they would love nothing more than to do that for you. Know that Jesus is abounding and his love is abounding, and your life will be changed for the better when you let him in. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Or perhaps you've been a Christian for a long time, but you're yet to take that step towards baptism. Maybe today or this week, after reflecting, you say to God, I'm ready. I want to be faithful and obedient to your will for my life, and I want to demonstrate this publicly through being baptised. Remember that Jesus took our place on the cross and credited us his righteousness. He was the ultimate example of being faithful. He himself was baptised by John as an act of faithfulness because it was the right thing to do. It is with this assurance that his sacrifice brings that allows us to freely chase after God's will for us, following in his faithfulness. He will always be with us, he loves us, and his faithfulness to us should encourage us in our walk with him. So whatever God may be placing on your heart, my encouragement to you this morning is to not let that nudge, that uncomfortable feeling, become silenced by the busyness of life or by fear of judgment. Find someone who you can be accountable to, who can help you to grow and foster that relationship with God and foster and grow your faithfulness. Let's pray. Father God, you are so good and you are so faithful. Your goodness keeps running after us. It never fails, it never gives up, and it never runs out. Lord, we pray that we might be reminded this week of your faithfulness to us. God, if we are struggling to see you at work in our lives, help us to remember your promises, to search for you and be intentional about reading your word and spending time with you. We ask for your guidance over each of us as we work through the areas of our lives where our own faithfulness is being challenged. We thank you that Jesus is our ultimate example of a good and faithful servant. May we find ways to grow in being imitators of him. Thank you for his sacrifice, and thank you that you love us. And we pray that you might help us to, as we strive to know, grow, show and share your gospel to our world. Amen.